Some moments in life are so unexpected, so utterly surreal, that they leave you frozen, trapped between disbelief and the crushing weight of reality. That night, I stumbled into one of those moments, and nothing would ever be the same again. It started like any other evening. The house was quiet, dimly lit by the soft glow of the hallway lamp. My husband was out of town for the weekend, leaving just me and my stepson under the same roof. It wasn't unusual. We had spent nights alone before, and there had never been a reason to think anything of it. But this time, something was different. I had spent most of the night in my room, lost in a book, the occasional sound of the television murmuring from downstairs. The soft hum of familiarity should have been comforting, but instead, an odd tension lingered in the air, an unshakable feeling that something was off. Then I heard it. A sound, soft but distinct, drifting from down the hall. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was nothing. But then it came again. A shuffle, a quiet movement. I frowned, setting my book down, listening more closely. The house was supposed to be still. My stepson's room was on the other side of the house. He should have been asleep by now. And yet, curiosity got the best of me. I slid out of bed, careful to keep my footsteps light as I stepped into the dim hallway. The silence was thick, the air heavy with something I couldn't quite name. My heart pounded a little harder as I followed the sound, leading me to a door left slightly ajar. His door. I hesitated. I shouldn't. I should turn around. But something made me stay. Slowly, carefully, I pushed the door open just enough to see inside. And what I saw made my breath hitch in my throat. I froze, my pulse slamming against my ribs. He was there. But he wasn't alone. The dim light from his bedside lamp cast long shadows across the room, distorting everything, making it hard to believe what I was seeing. He sat at the edge of his bed, his posture stiff, his head tilted slightly downward. His breathing was shallow, almost unsteady. And then I noticed what he was holding. A picture. My picture. My mind reeled. My breath felt stuck in my throat. I took an involuntary step back, but the movement caused the floor beneath me to creak ever so slightly. The sound sliced through the silence like a knife. His head snapped up. For a long, unbearable moment, we just stared at each other. Shock flickered across his face, quickly replaced by something else, something unreadable. His fingers clenched around the photograph, his knuckles turning white. You weren't supposed to see this. His voice was low, uneven. I swallowed hard, my mind scrambling to find something, anything to say. What are you doing? He didn't answer. Instead, he stood, the picture still in his grip, his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach twist. I can explain. I shook my head, unable to process what was happening. Explain what? Why do you have that? The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, he exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You wouldn't understand. His voice was barely above a whisper, but there was something in it. Something raw, something almost desperate. I took another step back, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because deep down I knew. This wasn't just about a picture. This was something more. Something I wasn't ready to face. And no matter what I did next, everything had already changed. The silence between us stretched unbearably long. My mind raced, struggling to process what I had just seen. My stepson stood there, frozen, gripping the picture as if letting it go would shatter whatever illusion he had been holding onto. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, my breath coming in shallow, uneven draws. I wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but my throat had gone dry. Finally, he exhaled, breaking the silence. I can explain. His voice was low, measured, but there was something else underneath it, something I couldn't quite name. Desperation? Guilt? Or something else entirely? I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to work. Then explain. He hesitated, his grip tightening around the photograph. His eyes flickered with something unreadable before he finally looked away, exhaling sharply. I didn't mean for you to find out like this. A bitter laugh bubbled up inside me. And how exactly was I supposed to find out? He flinched, his jaw clenching. For a long moment, he said nothing, his fingers still gripping the edges of the picture as if it held some kind of power over him. Then, finally, "I don't know." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it sent a chill down my spine. I forced myself to take a step forward, despite every nerve in my body telling me to turn around and leave. "How long?" He blinked, caught off guard. "What? How long have you been doing this?" I gestured vaguely toward the picture, my stomach twisting as I spoke. His lips parted as if he wanted to deny it, to tell me I was wrong. But he didn't. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. A while. A lump formed in my throat. "Why?" He let out a quiet, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "Do you really want to know?" I wasn't sure I did, but I nodded anyway. He was quiet for a long time before finally speaking. "Because I can't stop thinking about you." The words hit me like a freight train. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. "You don't mean that." "I do." His voice was steady now, more certain than before. He wasn't hesitating. He wasn't trying to take it back. I shook my head, trying to ground myself. "You're confused." "I'm not." His eyes met mine, unflinching. There was no doubt in them, no regret. And that terrified me more than anything. I needed to leave. Now. I turned quickly, moving toward the door, needing to put as much space between us as possible. But before I could reach it, his voice stopped me. "Please, don't go." I hesitated, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. "This isn't right." "I know." His voice was quieter now, almost pained. "But that doesn't change how I feel." I swallowed hard, willing myself to be stronger than the pull of his words. "You have to stop this." He didn't answer. And somehow, that was worse than anything he could have said. Finally, I forced my feet to move. I stepped out of the room, out of the suffocating tension that had wrapped around us like an invisible thread, binding us in something we were never meant to acknowledge. I didn't stop until I reached my room, closing the door softly behind me, my hands trembling at my sides. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing, my body still buzzing with the weight of everything that had just happened. And yet, despite everything, one terrible thought refused to leave my mind. This wasn't over. Not even close.